When driving a commercial motor vehicle, you know that safe operation depends on constant vigilance. You know that even a momentary lapse in judgment or alertness can have devastating consequences. And you know that any driver who operates any vehicle while impaired by alcohol or drugs is asking for trouble, and maybe asking for tragedy. In order to prevent alcohol and drug-related accidents, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, or FMCSR, mandate testing for drivers of vehicles that require a commercial driver's license, or CDL. These regulations spell out the details of required testing, confidentiality of the results, and the consequences for drivers who fail an alcohol test or test positive for drugs. In this program, we'll cover the key points that you need to be aware of when it comes to alcohol and drug testing. Most drivers agree that alcohol and drug testing is an important tool in keeping impaired drivers off the road.
I don't think anyone should drink and drive, especially anybody who drives heavy equipment.
Well, obviously you're navigating a vehicle that can weigh as much as 80,000 pounds, and you need all your faculties in order to do that safely. So if you're impaired in any way at all, you can make the job much more dangerous.
Drivers under the influence of alcohol or drugs while they're on the road is a real bad thing for all of us because it reflects on all drivers. And I think that that needs to be controlled. And I'm not against any of the testing or any of those things that go with that.
When it comes to alcohol, the regulations put it this way: no driver shall report for duty or remain on duty requiring the performance of safety-sensitive functions while having an alcohol concentration of 0.04 or greater. Further, the regulations say no driver shall use alcohol while performing safety-sensitive functions, and no driver shall perform safety-sensitive functions within 4 hours after using alcohol. There are similar regulations that prohibit use of controlled substances like marijuana, cocaine, opiates, amphetamines, and phencyclidine. In fact, the regs state that no driver may report for duty or remain on duty requiring the performance of safety-sensitive functions when the driver uses any controlled substance. The one exception is when a driver is taking medication under the direction of a licensed medical practitioner who has advised the driver that the medication will not adversely affect his or her ability to operate a CMV safely. Both the alcohol and drug prohibitions use the term safety-sensitive function. What does this mean? Safety-sensitive function means all time from the time a driver begins or is required to be ready to work until he or she is relieved from all responsibility for performing work. This includes driving, loading and unloading, supervising others loading and unloading, waiting to be dispatched, and inspecting or servicing equipment. The complete definition of a safety-sensitive function can be found in Section 382.107 of the FMCSR.
Did you know that time spent obtaining assistance or attending to a disabled vehicle is considered performing a safety-sensitive function under the regulations? That means that even if you won't be driving because your truck is disabled, you cannot have a beer while you wait for a tow truck or mechanic to assist you.
In order to ensure that drivers are not using alcohol or drugs on the job, the regulations have established a number of tests. These include pre-employment testing for drugs and post-accident, random, and reasonable suspicion testing for drugs and alcohol. And when necessary, return to duty and follow-up testing. If you're working in the trucking industry, you already know about pre-employment testing. Prior to performing any safety-sensitive function for an employer, drivers must undergo testing for controlled substances. This usually means that the driver must visit a testing facility, provide a urine sample, and fill out some paperwork. If no controlled substances are found, the process ends there. We'll talk about what happens if controlled substances are found a little later. Also, keep in mind that pre-employment testing for alcohol may be conducted if your employer meets a set of established criteria. Post-accident testing is required following accidents involving the loss of human life, accidents involving injuries that require treatment away from the scene, and where the driver receives a citation for a moving traffic violation, accidents where at least one vehicle is disabled to the point that it needs a tow truck, and the driver receives a citation for a moving traffic violation. Often, the post-accident alcohol test is administered by law enforcement. The employer then obtains a copy of the test results to meet the regulations. If the test is not administered by law enforcement, the employer is required to administer the post-accident alcohol test within 2 hours. If the test is not performed within 2 hours, the employer must prepare and maintain a record explaining why the test was not promptly completed. If the test is not performed within 8 hours, the employer must stop trying to give the test and prepare and maintain a record explaining why the test was not completed. A driver who is required to take a post-accident alcohol test may not use alcohol for 8 hours following the accident, or until the driver undergoes the test, whichever comes first. Post-accident testing is also required for controlled substances. The test must take place within 32 hours of the accident. If the test is not administered within 32 hours, the employer must stop trying to give the test and prepare and maintain a record explaining why the test was not performed.
Did you know that the rules regarding post-accident testing only apply to accidents that result from operating your commercial motor vehicle? If you or someone else is hurt while loading or unloading cargo, or while getting on or off a parked vehicle, no post-accident test is required by the regulations. However, your employer may have a company policy that requires testing after all accidents. Check with your supervisor regarding your company policies.
Random testing is a necessary function in keeping impaired drivers off the road. The regulations spell out how drivers are to be selected for testing and how the testing must take place. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration determines the percentage of drivers selected for testing each year. The selection method must be scientifically valid, such as a random number table or a computer-based random number generator. The method chosen must give all drivers an equal chance of being chosen for testing. Methods such as pulling names out of a hat are not scientifically random, so they can't be used. When you are selected for random testing, you must go directly to the testing site, unless doing so would compromise safety. Testing for alcohol must be done while you're performing safety-sensitive functions, or just before or just after. Testing for drugs can be done at any time while you're at work for your employer. Some carriers have only one driver. How can these drivers be selected for random testing? When companies have one driver, they must participate in a consortium, a pool that brings together enough drivers to provide for meaningful random selection. Individuals who supervise drivers must receive specific training in the behaviors that indicate alcohol misuse or controlled substance use. If a supervisor observes a driver exhibiting these behaviors, he or she is required to document this information and send the driver for a reasonable suspicion test.
Did you know that you can't be ordered to take a reasonable suspicion test because someone told your supervisor that you look like you may be impaired? The regulations require that the supervisor observe you personally, be trained according to the regulations to make a reasonable suspicion determination, and be able to document the observations that led to ordering a reasonable suspicion test. You can't be ordered to take a test based on a hunch or intuition or hearsay.
If you fail an alcohol test or test positive for controlled substances, there are a number of steps you must take before you may again perform any safety-sensitive function. One of these steps is passing a return-to-duty test. It works like this. When a driver fails an alcohol test or tests positive for a controlled substance, he or she must be advised by the employer regarding resources available to resolve the problem. This includes evaluation by a substance abuse professional, an SAP. The SAP will evaluate the driver and direct him or her to participate in an appropriate rehabilitation program.
The assessment that the SAP does really determines what level of care they need. And so it can begin at one end with just some educational courses that might be similar to the drunk driving programs at a technical institute, or it could be a self-evaluation program where they find other ways to deal with life or to entertain themselves than using substances that are illegal and prohibited. So it can range up to some individual counseling. It could go to an intensive outpatient program. It could go to a residential program and aftercare. So there's a whole range of services that will be determined based on the use of the person when they present for the assessment.
This can be an educational program. This can be outpatient services. This could be day treatment services. This could be inpatient alcohol and drug rehab, depending on what the SAP evaluator decides at the end of the evaluation.
After the SAP has determined that the driver has completed the prescribed rehabilitation program, the driver must successfully pass a return-to-duty test. If the driver has an alcohol concentration of less than 0.02 and/or a negative controlled substances test result on the return-to-duty test, he or she may return to safety-sensitive functions. But such a driver is subject to follow-up testing, at least 6 follow-up tests in the first 12 months after returning to duty. And follow-up testing may continue for up to 60 months. That's 5 years.
Did you know that refusing to take an alcohol test or a controlled substance test has the same result as failing an alcohol test or having a positive drug test result? You cannot escape the consequences of testing by refusing to take a test.
We've talked about the reasons for testing and the types of tests that are required. Now let's talk about what you can expect when you go to the testing facility. First, alcohol testing. An alcohol test must be administered by someone who is specifically trained and qualified in testing procedures and on the testing device used by the testing facility. This person is called a BAT, a breath alcohol technician, or an STT, a screening test technician. The National Highway Safety Administration must approve any device used by the testing facility. Initial testing can be done with a non-evidential device, but if the test indicates an alcohol concentration of 0.02 or greater, a confirmation test must be done with an evidential breath testing, or EBT device. The test must be done in an area that provides privacy for you and prevents unauthorized persons from seeing or hearing the test results. And the BAT can only conduct one test at a time. To begin, the BAT will ask you for identification.
Could you please show me your ID so I can confirm your identification?
Sure.
If you request it, the BAT must provide identification to you. Next, the BAT fills out Part 1 of the approved alcohol testing form.
Thanks. Now, the back of this form explains today's procedure. And I've completed the first part of the form, but if you could please review it for accuracy and then complete Part 2. Now, this indicates your agreement to take the test, okay?
Okay.
If you refuse to fill out the form, that is considered a refusal to test and has the same consequences as failing a test. After Parts 1 and 2 of the form are completed, the BAT administers the test.
Okay, please select a mouthpiece that you'll use for the test and note that they're individually wrapped and they have not been used before. Thanks. Now, this is the device that will actually perform the test. And you can see that currently there's no reading on the device, but when you blow into the mouthpiece, your result will be displayed here and on the computer screen. Okay? Now, I need you to blow forcefully into the mouthpiece, okay, until I tell you to stop. Keep going. Keep going. Stop. Great.
Following the test, the bat must show you the result.
Okay, here is the result of your breath alcohol test, 0.01. And that's below the threshold for a confirmation test, so we're almost done.
This driver tested below 0.02, so he's allowed to return to work. But let's see what would have happened if the test had been 0.02 or greater.
Your result is 0.04, and that means I'm required to administer a confirmation test. Now, we're required to wait at least 15 minutes, but no longer than 30 minutes between tests. And while we're waiting, it's very important that you don't eat or drink anything or put anything in your mouth. Eating or drinking could actually cause you to have a higher result on your next test by accumulating alcohol in your mouth. And belching could actually have the same effect, so try not to belch. Do you have any questions?
No.
If the confirmation test is not administered by the same bat as the screening test, the entire procedure must be repeated, including verifying identification.
Okay, so it's been 15 minutes since your screening test, so we can go ahead and complete the confirmation test. You can select the mouthpiece that you wish to use, and I'll go ahead and clear the EBT.
The testing procedure for the confirmation breath alcohol test is similar to the screening test.
You can see that the device currently reads 0. And just like before, if you could go ahead and blow into the device.
However, if the result on the confirmation test is different from that of the screening test, the confirmation test is considered the final result.
Okay.
If you can't provide an adequate breath sample after multiple attempts, that too will be reported to your employer. You'll be required to see a doctor to determine if there is a medical reason that you can't supply a breath sample.
Did you know that if your alcohol test result is 0.02 or greater, but less than 0.04, your employer is required to remove you from safety-sensitive functions for at least 24 hours.
The procedures for controlled substances, or drug testing, are similar to alcohol testing. The sample collection must be done in a setting that offers you privacy and meets security requirements. The testing technician must be trained in the process and use approved materials and documents.
Hi, Mr. Johnson. I'm Susan. I'm going to be collecting your drug screening sample today. Do you have a photo ID with you?
Prior to the drug screening test, you must provide a photo ID, or you must be identified by an employer's representative who is present at the collection site.
Next, I'd like you to empty your pockets, please.
Testing for controlled substances requires evaluating a urine sample, so the collection technician must take certain steps to ensure that the sample is not tampered with or contaminated.
The back of this form explains this procedure.
The regs cover the amount of the sample to be collected and the procedures for handling, recording, and shipping the sample to a certified testing lab.
Before you provide the sample, I need you to wash your hands here. Afterward, I'll turn off the water supply. I need you to fill the sample cup at least half full and don't flush the toilet when you're done. Do you have any questions?
What'll I do with the sample when I'm finished?
I'll be right outside the door. You can just bring it to me. I need you to go ahead and wash your hands.
The sample collected must be at least 45 milliliters. This will provide enough urine for split samples of 30 and 15 milliliters. The technician will test the temperature of the sample, then place 2 specimens in separate containers, which will be sealed in full view of the driver. If testing is to be done at a certified lab that is not located at the collection site, the samples are also prepared for shipping while the driver observes.
Okay.
After you have observed the sample preparation and signed the appropriate forms, your part is done.
You can go ahead and put that with your files and they'll be contacting you.
Once the lab has conducted the required testing, the results are forwarded to the Medical Review Officer, or MRO. The MRO is a licensed physician who is responsible for receiving and reviewing all test results. If the test results are positive, adulterated, substituted, or invalid, the MRO will investigate the reason for this result. The investigation will include contacting you to discuss the test result. During this conversation, the MRO will discuss with you any possible medical reasons for the test result. This is a confidential call and gives you an opportunity to discuss the test before your employer is contacted. What can you do if you get this call? If the test result for the first sample is positive, adulterated, or substituted, you have 72 hours to request that your second sample be tested by a different certified lab. This gives you the opportunity for an independent confirmation or rejection of the first result. If the second lab verifies that the initial test result is correct, you will be contacted by the MRO. Then, the MRO has one more call to make to your employer. Because it's so important that impaired drivers be kept off the road, the MRO will call a designated individual at your employer and report the results. When the employer is contacted by the MRO, the next step is for the employer to advise the driver regarding the resources available to resolve the problem. This includes evaluation by an SAP.
Did you know that if you make a timely request for a test of a split specimen, your employer must ensure that the testing be done as required? While you are not required to pay for the test before it takes place, your employer may seek reimbursement from you. The regulations take no position when it comes to who pays for the test, so long as the employer ensures that the testing is done as required and the results are released appropriately.
Some employers have a voluntary self-admission program or policy in place that allows employees who admit to alcohol misuse or controlled substance use to participate in an education or treatment program. The regulations are very specific on how this program or policy must work. For example, drivers must make the admission before performing any safety-sensitive functions, and they cannot make the admission to escape the testing requirements of the regulations. Following the admission, the steps for return to duty are similar to the steps that must be followed had the driver tested positive, including professional evaluation, return to duty testing, and potentially some form of follow-up testing.
Did you know that employers are not required to have a self-admission program or policy? If they choose to have one, they must not take adverse action against employees who self-admit within the guidelines of the program or policy. And they must not allow an employee to return to safety-sensitive functions until that employee has completed the education and treatment program required by the regulations and passed the return to duty test.
The regulations require employers to instruct their drivers on the drug and alcohol regulations and to communicate their alcohol and drug policies. Individuals who supervise drivers are required to have additional training in recognizing the behaviors that may indicate alcohol abuse or controlled substance use. The records of individual drivers, such as lab results from tests, must be maintained in a secure manner so that disclosure to unauthorized individuals is prevented. However, the employer is required to make the records available to the employee on written request and to agencies with regulatory responsibility over the employer.
The public has a right to expect that all professional drivers are alert and able to maneuver through traffic in a safe manner at all times.
The purpose of drug and alcohol testing is to keep the transportation industry safe. We have a very important role and responsibility to the motoring public, and our drivers need to be safe on the highway.
Everyone agrees that drinking, drugs, and driving don't mix. Fortunately, the transportation industry has a great record overall when it comes to impaired drivers. The vast majority of professional drivers know, obey, and support the rules. Because breaking the rules can have such tragic and devastating consequences, testing for alcohol abuse and controlled substance use just makes good sense. Knowing the regulations and applying them in your daily work means you're doing your part to protect your industry, your company, your livelihood, and the driving public.